Today, we are diving into the incredible story of Australia's Air Force during the Second World War. And really, it's a tale of desperation, of unbelievable ingenuity, and a stunning transformation that saw a nation go from flying outdated biplanes to operating some of the most advanced aircraft of the time, all in just 6 short and dramatic years.
So that's the big question, right? At the very start of the war, the Royal Australian Air Force, or the RAAF as we'll call it, was a tiny force, and it was dangerously unprepared for the storm that was about to hit. So how on earth did it become such a critical part of the Allied victory? Let's find out.
First up, we have to understand the starting point. Back in 1939, when war broke out in Europe, Australia's skies were, to put it mildly, wide open. The RAF was equipped with planes that just weren't up to the task of modern warfare.
And this slide really says it all. I mean, look at the contrast. On one hand, you've got the RAF's frontline fighter, the Hawker Demon. It's a 2-seat biplane. It was already obsolete. On the other hand, the rest of the world was already flying fast, heavily armed monoplanes. The technology gap was just immense, and the consequences of that gap would become tragically clear very, very quickly.
And this is where that problem became a disaster. When the war in the Pacific kicked off, Australian pilots were sent to defend Singapore flying the American-made Brewster Buffalo. But when they came up against Japan's legendary Zero fighter, the Buffalo was slow, it was undergunned, and the losses were just devastating. It was an absolutely brutal wake-up call.
Okay, so Australia had to respond, and it had to respond fast. The threat was no longer on the other side of the world. It was right on the doorstep. And this is what forced that huge shift toward defending the homeland, a journey that would take the RAF from pure desperation to eventually air dominance.
With the real possibility of an invasion and being cut off from suppliers in Britain and the US, Australia did something pretty remarkable. It just built its own fighter. The CAC Boomerang was designed in a matter of months. Now, it wasn't a world-beating interceptor, but it was tough, it was well-armed, and it was absolutely perfect for its most important job, supporting the troops fighting in the jungles of New Guinea. It's a true symbol of Australian resilience.
As American factories started churning out planes, the RAF got its hands on the legendary P-40 Kitty Hawk. Now, this wasn't the fastest or the most nimble fighter out there, but it was rugged, it was reliable, and boy, could it take a beating. In those desperate early battles for New Guinea, it was the pilots and their Kitty Hawks who held the line, turning the tide at critical places like Port Moresby and Milne Bay. It really was the workhorse of the Pacific War.
And then the icon arrived. After a series of devastating Japanese air raids on the northern city of Darwin, Britain sent its very best, the Supermarine Spitfire. And get this, they were flown by Australian combat veterans returning from Europe. These were elite interceptors, planes designed for one job and one job only: climb fast and shoot down bombers. Their presence brought a whole new level of confidence to Australia's home defense.
So, with the homeland feeling a lot more secure, the RAAF could start to shift its focus from defense to offense. Now it was time to take the fight to the enemy, and that meant you needed bombers, a whole fleet of them.
Just like they did with the Boomerang fighter, Australia's local industry stepped up again, this time producing the Bristol Beaufort torpedo bomber. This plane became an absolute mainstay for the RAAF in the Pacific. Its crews flew incredibly dangerous low-level missions, becoming experts at hunting down Japanese ships and playing a crucial role in strangling enemy supply lines.
But you have to remember, Australia's fight wasn't only in the Pacific. Thousands of Australian airmen were serving in Europe with RAF Bomber Command. Over there, they were flying the legendary Avro Lancaster, taking part in the massive strategic night bombing campaign against Germany. The crews faced unbelievable danger. In fact, RAF squadrons suffered some of the highest casualty rates of the entire war.
Now, before the Lancaster, many of those Aussie crews flew in the Vickers Wellington. And what's so cool about the Wellington is how it was built. You can see it here. It used something called a geodetic structure, basically this crisscrossing metal lattice. What that meant was the plane could get shot to pieces with huge chunks missing and still somehow hold together and get its crew home. An absolutely brilliant design.
As the war in the Pacific moved into its final, bloody stages, the RAAF needed a bomber with immense range. They had to hit targets deep inside Japanese-held territory. The answer was the American B-24 Liberator. This long-range, heavy bomber became the RAAF standard for the final push, carrying the air war all the way to Japan's doorstep.
Of course, it's always the fighters and bombers that get all the glory, right? But victory in the air depends on a whole ecosystem of other planes, the real unsung heroes that were the backbone of the entire war effort.
And very few aircraft are as legendary as the PBY Catalina. These were flying boats, so they could land on water and they had incredible endurance. But it was their secret missions that earned them that awesome nickname, the Black Cats.
Okay, so let's walk through a typical mission. The Catalina would take off at dusk, painted black to be invisible in the night sky. It would fly low and slow for hours and hours, hunting for enemy ships or sneaking into enemy harbors to lay mines. On top of all that, they were also famous for air-sea rescues, often landing in rough seas to pull down pilots out of the water. An incredibly versatile and absolutely vital aircraft.
You just can't talk about the war in the Pacific without talking about the C-47 Dakota. This plane was the lifeline. The jungle campaigns in New Guinea, they would have been completely impossible without it. Dakotas flew nonstop, dropping food, ammunition, and supplies to isolated troops on the front lines, often in just treacherous conditions.
And none of this, of course, would have been possible without a massive training pipeline back home. You had thousands of pilots learning the absolute basics on the humble little de Havilland Tiger Moth. From there, they'd move up to the Australian-built CAC Werraway, an advanced trainer that was so versatile it was sometimes thrown into combat. In fact, one famously managed to shoot down a Japanese Zero. And for the bomber crews, planes like the Avro Anson served as flying classrooms, training entire teams for their very complex job.
So, when you put all of this together, what do you get? You get one of the most rapid and one of the most remarkable military transformations of the entire 20th century.
This timeline really puts it all into perspective. The RAAF starts the war flying biplanes like the Gloucester Gladiator. Within 3 years, it's building its own emergency fighter. A couple of years after that, its crews are flying 4-engine heavy bombers over Germany. And then, by 1945, Australian pilots are in the cockpit of the Gloucester Meteor, the Allies' first operational jet fighter. From biplanes to jets in 6 years. It is absolutely staggering to think about.
Ultimately, the RAAF's journey through the Second World War is a story of incredible adaptation. It went from this small, almost token force with obsolete planes into a huge, powerful, and respected air arm that made a vital contribution to the Allied victory, both in the Pacific and in Europe.
And that kind of leads us with a final thought. This entire story is defined by ingenuity, by courage, and by an incredible ability to innovate under the most extreme pressure imaginable. So the question is, which part of that legacy, that homegrown self-reliance, the close cooperation with allies, or just that sheer will to adapt, is the most important lesson for us today?